In the beginnings of many chapters of the Quran, there are sets of mysterious letters, these ones. For 14 centuries, scholars, linguists, and scientists were not able to decode their meaning. We can divide the scholars who studied these letters into 3 groups. The first group of scholars are the ones who gave up trying to understand them and claim that these letters are a secret forever, and only God knows their meaning. However, this contradicts the statement in the Quran which tells us that the verses, including these groups of letters, are clear, which means that we can know their meaning. These letters are also called a revelation, which means that they were not meant to be a secret. A revelation is something which stops being a secret. Also, the Quran tells us that all its verses, including these letters, are verses with one meaning or multiple meanings. But it never mentions verses which have no meaning. So clearly, this group of scholars is wrong. The second group of scholars includes those who have attempted to give us the meaning, but they always got it wrong. They invented ridiculous ideas, like claiming that these are the names of God. But this cannot be true, because the Quran calls these letters proofs of God. Proofs of God are not names of God. For example, the sky is proof of God, but it is not a name of God. Creatures of God are not God. So they unknowingly committed a blasphemy by describing signs of God as God. And also they went against God, who prohibits us to say anything about him which we do not know for sure. The third group of scholars includes those who gave correct comments about these letters, but it had nothing to do with their meaning. For example, they said that these letters are important for chanting or rhythmic purposes during recitation, which is true, but this has nothing to do with their meaning. The whole Quran is a arithmetical book anyway. It sounds like poetry with rhyme in Arabic, and yet the other words in the Quran also have meaning. Another example of correct comments about these letters is that they are important for keeping the Quran preserved through a mathematical code, and that their frequencies of occurrence prove statistically that the Quran is a revelation from God. This is a great discovery, but it has nothing to do with their meaning. Because of that discovery, we now understand the statistical significance of these letters and their role in the structure of the Quran, but it still does not tell us their meaning. The question still remains: what does ALM mean? What does HM mean? What does TS mean? We know now how important they are, but what do they mean? To find out what they mean, I gave up on any ideas, including my ideas, and I decided to do the research systematically. When I say systematically, I am talking about simply listing everything that the Quran says about these letters without trying to make sense of it in the beginning. So I went through the whole Quran and listed all the possible ways in which the Quran describes these letters. The Quran calls these letters scripture, revelation, proofs, signs, letters, verses, recitation in Arabic, removal of doubt, 7 pairs or 14 groups of letters. And we already knew this, and it makes sense that the Quran describes them like that. But the Quran calls these letters 11 more things, and these are the deeper and more interesting descriptions. The Quran also calls these letters decree, record, guidance, remembrance, clear Quran, wisdom, truth, mercy for good people, good news for believers, a test, a trial, and a warning. So how can these letters be a warning if we don't understand what they mean? How can they be guidance if we don't understand what they mean? How can they be wisdom if we don't understand what they mean? How can they be remembrance? Remembrance of what? How can they be a decree? Decree about what? How can they be clear unless we understand their meaning? And all of this will make sense once I explain their meaning to you. You will see how they are a decree, record, guidance, remembrance, clear, wisdom, truth, good news, a test, mercy, and warning, all at the same time. So now, let's delve into their meaning. To know their meaning, we have to look at where these letters came from. According to linguists and historians, the letters of the Arabic alphabet came from the Proto-Arabic versions, which originated from the Phoenician alphabet, or the North Semitic alphabet, or the Proto-Sinaitic alphabet, which originated in Sinai, otherwise known as the Early Alphabetic. So the Phoenician alphabet is the first alphabet in the world, from which all the alphabets of the people of the scripture come from. This alphabet originated from pictograms or specific words. For example, Alif, the letter A, came from a simplified symbolic drawing of an ox. in that ancient original language. This happened around the time of Abraham. However, the Arabs did not preserve this alphabet very well, since they did not use it much. Scientific writing and written literature were almost inexistent during that time in ancient Arabia. So these letters could easily change shape and no other person would complain. Also, the ancient Israelis changed these letters significantly because of their exile in Babylon and so on. However, the ancient Greeks, who valued scientific writing and literature, borrowed the letters from the Phoenicians, and they kept them almost intact until today because they used them constantly in their philosophy, science, and literature, and even later in their Orthodox church writings. So it was not practical for ancient Greeks to significantly change the shapes of these letters, because they were being constantly used by many of them simultaneously. And any change by one person would be criticized by the other person who also used them. So let's look at these letters in their original Phoenician form. Now look at the Greek and mostly European form. And now look at the Arabic form. As you can see, out of 14 letter shapes of the original alphabet, 13 of them have been basically preserved in Greek or Cyrillic or Latin, and only the direction has changed from left to right, because in the ancient times the direction of writing was not determined. People would write both ways, from right to left and from left to right. They were equally correct, and depending in which direction they wrote, they would flip the letters in that direction, and the left to right direction eventually became more dominant among Europeans. Even in English, most of these shapes have been preserved, but in Arabic, their shapes have changed so much they are not recognizable anymore. Of course, the pronunciation of these letters is correct in Arabic, like alif, lam, mim, etc., because Arabs had a great oral tradition, which is why God revealed them to them like sounds. These letters were revealed to Muhammad like sounds, correctly in the Arabic tongue. This is why the Quran says that it was revealed in Arabic tongue, but it never says that it was revealed in Arabic writing. Muhammad did not see these letters as visions. He heard them from Gabriel as sounds, and then the people wrote them in whatever alphabet they had available, which happened to be their distorted alphabet, which is why the Quran calls the Arabs and Muhammad illiterate people, because they did not have the original writing system available among them. So again, God did not show these letters to Muhammad in a vision, because he would not recognize them. Instead, Gabriel spoke them to him. But when God showed the revelation to Moses, he gave it to him in writing, because at that time the letters were still correct among the children of Israel, looking similar to the Phoenician and Greek letters. Phoenician alphabet went extinct, and the closest existing alphabet to it is the Greek alphabet, from which the Latin and all the European alphabets descended. So when it comes to writing these letters and the shapes of these letters, among the existing languages, the European letters are the most correct ones, including the English letters for the most part. This is good news because I can explain the meanings of these letters using mostly shapes of English letters, since this video is in English. So it is not a coincidence that God saved the explanation of the meanings of these letters for a time when the English letters are the dominant letters of the world and the internet. And it's not a coincidence that He's doing it through me, a person of both European and Muslim descent. I happen to be at the center of this issue, just like the Arabs were at the center of correct speaking when the Quran was revealed, and just like the ancient Israelis were at the center of correct writing when the original Torah was revealed. So now let me explain to you the meanings of these letters as they were in their original form. First letter Alif. Alif meant ox, bull in the original language. It was written sideways. See the horns and the head, and here would be the eyes. Alif. Next letter Lam. Lam means goad. A goad is simply a piece of wood used to drive the ox by poking it from the sides. Lam. Next letter Ra. It's shaped like this in Greek, Cyrillic, and in the original language. Ra means head. Can you see the head and the neck? In English, it's like this. R. Next letter Ain. Ain means eye. Can you see how it's shaped like an eye? The Greeks changed the sound into O, but in the original language it was Ain. Ain still means eye in Arabic and Hebrew. Next letter, he. The Greeks dropped the breathing part. They simply pronounce it as e. But in the original language, this was he. It means jubilation. It represents a healthy and a happy person. See how it looks like a person with raised hands. He. Next letter, kaf. Kaf means hand. Can you see the resemblance? Kaf. Next letter, kaf. Kaf means the eye of the needle. Next letter, ya. Ya means arm in the original language. This is the only shape which was changed by the Greeks and the Europeans. First in Greek it became like a simple line, like an eye, and then in Latin it became like this. And then the English, for the same sound, they use this. Like yes, ya, yes. I'm gonna use this. But the original one is this one. Next letter, ta. Like a T. Ta means wheel. It used to be shaped like this. Only the middle part survived in English. Next letter, sin. We have the same shape in Greek. Sin means pillar. It's simply a piece of wood, wider at the top to support things, wider in the middle to hold it, and wider at the bottom so it doesn't topple. Sin. Next letter, Saad. Saad means papyrus plant or just a plant. Can you see the two branches and the root? This is the correct shape. It still has this shape in Eastern Europe and in Hebrew. In English, it became like this. C. Like when you say center, not capital. Center. Saad. Next letter, noon. Noon means fish. It swerves like a fish. Noon. Next letter, meme. Meme means water, like the ripples of water. Next letter, ha. Ha means courtyard. It used to be shaped like this. Courtyard, a divided piece of land. So now we have the original symbols of these letters. However, they are not in appropriate size relative to each other. For example, the eye cannot be as big as the head, and the needle cannot be as big as the ox. So let me replace these same symbols with more realistic representations of them. Okay, so we had an ox, a goat to drive the ox, a head, an eye, jubilation, two raised hands, a hand, an arm, a needle, a pillar, a wheel, a plant, water, a fish, and a courtyard. You can probably see the connection already, how they are connected to each other. We can see an owner with a piece of land driving an ox and a few other things which he uses around him. But what does this mean? This is a very deep riddle. After a lot of thinking, trials, and mistakes, God guided me to the correct solution. This whole picture represents the whole earth, all of our civilization. The courtyard represents the environment. The head represents the government. The eye represents the media. If it is the eye of the ox, it represents us looking at the government, which is classical media. But if it is the eye of the human, it represents the government looking at us, which is social media. The arm is the public sector. The hand is social welfare, which is included in the public sector, just like the hand is included in the arm. Raised happy hands must represent the healthcare system. The goad is the technology. Technology drives the economy, so the ox must be the economy. Besides driving the ox forward, the goad can also be used to turn the ox left and right, in which case the goad is politics, turning the economy left and right. The ox drinks water. The economy uses energy, so water must be the energy sector. The plant, if it grows in land, in the environment, it means agriculture. But most linguists consider it a papyrus plant, which grows in water and is used to produce paper. In that case, it would be education. The fish lives in water. We said that water is the energy. So what lives inside the energy? Internet. So the fish is the internet. Now the needle. The human uses the needle for his own clothes, using the wool from the ox. So if the ox is the economy, the wool must be the outside beautiful parts of the economy, the arts. So what does the government do with the arts? It takes them and uses them for propaganda. So the needle must be the tool which shapes the propaganda, which is information. So the needle is information. Or maybe the needle is only used when you need to sew the torn clothes, only when propaganda fails. In which case the governments use security as a means to protect themselves. Since I'm not completely sure about this, let me just say that I'm talking about whatever is to civilization like the eye of the needle is to this picture. The wheel is transportation, obviously. The pillar is infrastructure, any kind of infrastructure. Here I put it beside the wheel, which means road infrastructure. But you can place this in any other place in this picture, and it would represent other types of infrastructure. So now we have deciphered the meaning of each symbol. I have to admit that there's a possibility for a slight reinterpretation of these symbols, because we use linguistic and archaeological sciences as additional sources, which are approximate sciences. For example, the letter Alif stands for the ox, which represents the economy, but some historians say that Alif symbolizes only the head of the ox, not the whole ox, which would represent only the stock market, the head of the economy, not the whole economy. In this video, I'm going to stick to just one interpretation to keep it simple. Someone might ask, why did not God just mention these concepts directly? Why did he use the symbol of an ox instead of simply using the word economy? Well, God refuses to use our made-up terminology. The word economy is an invented word. It does not mean anything concrete. There's not even an agreement amongst economists what the best definition of economy is. Of course, God recognizes the components of the economy, but he does not need to give a name to the whole group of things like we did. We are just a group of people selling things to each other in exchange for something else, and we call those things products, which we produce through what we call a management system, which according to God is simply wise behavior. To God, there's no such thing as economic knowledge. It's just wisdom. So all these concepts are human-made concepts, which are vague and only approximately describe a group of other components, while only those real components are mentioned by God. Only things which are 100% defined are mentioned by God. According to God, there's no such thing as cuisine, for example. It's just food and eating and ways of cooking, not even cooking, just heating, burning and preparing. There's no such thing as fashion. It's just short clothes and long clothes and wide clothes and tight clothes and differently shaped clothes and different combinations of colors. And these things are real, but fashion only exists in our minds. It's not completely real. It's a social construct. A social construct is something which appears to exist only because humans have agreed that it exists. It's hard for us to realize that it does not really exist because we have heard that word from early childhood. But it really does not exist. It's just a word which we invented. A symbol to represent a combination of things and concepts arranged in an approximate way in our mind. So when we use social constructs, nothing completely true can ever be expressed. But at the same time, nothing completely false can ever be expressed. And I deal with this in another video. But the idea is that the moment you use social constructs, you are always at least partly wrong. So God, who is perfect, refuses to be partly wrong. He knows those words, he knows we use them, but he does not use them, because they are invented concepts, which exist only in our minds, cultural concepts. They reflect a common language between believers and disbelievers, for peaceful coexistence and survival. But God never approved or disapproved those concepts. He only agreed with Adam what language we should use, and to give names to real things which he created and which exist. But everything else is just something we made up. It reflects our imperfections, our allowable imperfections, but not anything which has any basis in fundamental reality. I mean, where is fashion? Can you touch it? Where is the economy? What color does it have? God knew that these concepts would emerge as a result of civilization, but he refused to mention them, and yet he found a way to let us know that it was his plan for those concepts to emerge. This is part of the reason why the Quran is the last book revealed, because there's nothing more true which you can mention, no matter how many more words we invent. When you use the modern created concepts, you can only express partial truths or partial lies. God does not speak in partial truths. So what he did is that he informed us about these concepts using symbols, and then he let me decode them, knowing that I'm imperfect enough to use in my vocabulary words which are partially correct. So I'm serving as a bridge between the complete truths and the partial truths of the modern world. The other reason why God used these symbols in the Quran instead of directly mentioning the modern areas of civilization is because these symbols are more than just that. They are also numbers. In the ancient times, people used the symbols of the alphabet to write the numbers before written numbers existed. So each letter of the alphabet also represented a number. For example, A is 1, L is 30, M is 40. I inform you in another video titled The End of the World that these numbers represent the number of lunar years until a certain event in the future, which is why these letters are described in the Quran as revelations. A revelation is news from the future. These letters are also called warnings. So through these letters, God is warning us about certain events in the future. And I already told you what areas of civilization these letters represent. So they must be warnings about those specific areas of civilization, which will happen after a given number of lunar years. So the symbols, the Quranic initials, tell us two things at once. One, the type of global crisis, and two, the number of lunar years until they happen. But from which year should we start the counting? Because I discovered their meaning, that means that it was meant to be seen from my perspective, from the time when I was given these letters. I was given these letters in 2005, which is the Hijri or lunar year 1426. And I tell you the details of how this happened in another video, titled My Journey to Truth and Enlightenment. But to save time in this video, let's just take that year, the Hijri year 1426, as the starting point from where we measure my predictions. So here is the list of all the Quranic initials, from those with the smallest geometrical value to those with the largest geometrical value. So we can have the predictions nicely listed in chronological order. And here are their geometrical values. So these numbers represent the number of lunar years between the time when I was given these initials and when that specific event will happen. So we simply add each of these numbers to the Hijri year 1426, and the next lunar year will be the year when that event happens. And here are those lunar years. And here are the corresponding Gregorian years. And here are the meanings of those letters. So this table suggests that there will be a global crisis in the area of transportation and healthcare in the years 2019 and 2020. As you know, this already happened. It was the COVID-19 pandemic. It started as a healthcare crisis, and then the governments tried to prevent the healthcare system from overloading and imposed a prohibition of travel and transportation. So it became both a healthcare and a human transportation crisis. So the first event already came true. Let's continue with the upcoming crisis in the future. So there will be a crisis in environment and energy in 2052-53. An internet crisis in 2054-55. A crisis in transportation and infrastructure in 2073. A crisis in public sector and infrastructure in 2074. A crisis in economy, technology or politics and energy in 2074 and 75. A crisis in education or agriculture in 2093-94. An information or maybe security crisis in 2103 or 4. This crisis might not be easy to see, just like it is not easy to see the eye of the needle. Then a crisis in transportation, infrastructure and energy in 2111 or 12. A crisis in economy, technology or politics, energy and education or agriculture in 2162 or 63. A crisis in social welfare, healthcare, public sector, media and agriculture or education in 2195 or 96. A crisis in media, infrastructure and information in 2229 or 30. a crisis in economy, politics, or technology, and government in 2230 and 31, and a crisis in economy, technology, or politics, energy, and government in 2269. It's worth mentioning that some of these crises are in years joined one after the other. For example, in 2073, 74, and 75. And this might very well be one large crisis across 3 years, gradually spreading from one area in 1 year into another area in the next years. The other big crisis seems to start in 2229 or 30 and spread to other areas in 2230 or 31. One more thing, a bonus crisis. There is a special case, only one case of initials, where two separate Quranic initials occur one after another in the same surah, in Surah 42. We find Hamim in the first verse, and then Ain Sin Kaf in the second verse. We already took them into account separately, but since they are also in the same surah together, they give us a bigger year together. If we consider them together, it seems to suggest that in the year 2275 or 2276, there will be a big war which would damage these areas. And by the way, as you can see, out of all the groups of Quranic initials, none of their values go beyond the year 2280, which is when the world will end, which I explain in another video titled The End of the World. But this is an additional indication that my theory is right. If my theory would be wrong, there is a high likelihood that at least one of these initials would be large enough to correspond to a year beyond the end of the world. But all of them fit nicely within the time frame before the end of the world, with the last one happening just a few years before the end of the world. Now let me remind you again how the Quran describes these letters, and you will see how those descriptions make sense now. So the Quran calls these letters decree. And yes, they are what God has decreed for the modern civilization. They are called record. And yes, they are a future record of what will happen to the world. They are called clear Quran. Yes, now that we understand them, they are clear, finally. They are called wisdom because from them we also can understand how different areas of modern civilization are interconnected, just like the pieces in this puzzle are interconnected. They are called a test, trial, because modern people will be tested through those crises which will happen in the future. They are called a warning, because the disbelievers are warned about those sufferings which they will incur. They are called truth, because it is really what will happen. They are called guidance, because the believers will be guided and prepared how to avoid the damages from those crises. They are called good news for believers, because the believers who believe this video have the opportunity to use this information to their advantage. They can invest appropriately or withdraw the investments before those crises happen to avoid losses, get rich, give charity, and ultimately win. And I give you more details about this in another video.